Okay, I've got our recording started so that if you miss something, you can come back and watch it later. So, starting off with rhythm, the first thing we have to do is define it. What is rhythm? So, somebody put either in the chat or in on the whiteboard up here, what is rhythm? Okay, I'm talking specifically about the definition musically of rhythm. Good. The order of durations of sound and silences, or the flow of music through time. Either of those definitions is perfect. The order of durations of sounds and silence, or the flow of music through time. Very good. So we're talking about duration here. Now, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about duration with the categories of sound because it's pretty simple, how long the sound lasts. But here we're going to talk about organizing that a little bit. And that's what rhythm is all about. It's the flow of music through time. It's how we order the durations of sounds and silence, or we can think of it as an arrangement of the note lengths. So the way that we arrange the note lengths in music, how long each sound is in relation to itself or in relation to time. Very good. Now we have two other definitions here, beat and meter, and they are two different things that often get confused with one another. So I want to try to clarify that for you as much as possible. So what is the beat in music? Anybody have a definition of what beat is in music? Good. So it divides the song equally into units of time, and specifically, it is a recurrent pulsation that divides music into equal units of time. So it's a recurrent pulsation. So I'm going to grab my guitar. Oops, whacking my guitar against stuff. So if I'm playing a chord progression, if I'm playing a rhythm on my guitar, you can start to feel a beat in there, a regular pulsation of that. And it's going to sound like this: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So we get that recurrent pulsation that drives the music along. And it gives us a way to divide the music equally in time. Okay, if you can tap your foot to music, that's what you're feeling, the beat there to the music. Okay, now meter is a little bit different in music. Meter has to do with the beat, but it is not the same thing. So what is meter in music? Good, Tina. The beat or the meter, as Tina says in the chat there, is the organization of beats into regular groups. That's really good. The organization of beats into regular groups. So we can take that rhythm, the beat that we were feeling, do, dot, 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 and we can start to organize it into a number of regular groups. And that's where I get things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm organizing the beats into 4 parts. Okay, I'm organizing it into 4 beats within what we call a measure. Okay, and we typically divide the beats into groups of 2s or 3s. So we'll talk about with music, especially with early music, whether it's divided into 2s or 3s, whether it's going to be 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, or if it's going to be 1 lolly, 2 1 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1. So that is going to be affected by the meter. Sorry, my B string went a little flat there. Okay. So organizing it, we organize it into groups of 2s and 3s. Very good. So our meter is going to be defined at the beginning of a piece of music by the time signature. And that's the first thing you're going to see on a piece of music. So for example, and I have to draw this with a pencil because it doesn't look right if I type it, you'll see 4/4. All right, that is a time signature. In fact, we call that common time because it's such a normal time signature for us to see in our music. But what does the time signature actually do? What does that tell us specifically? The time signature defines the meter for us. So it tells us how many beats are in a measure and what kind of note is going to get one beat. So there's 2 parts of the time signature. It tells us how we're going to divide the beats up, how many beats per measure, but it's also going to tell us when we're looking at it how many of what note is going to equal what beat, what kind of note, whether it's a quarter note, a half note, an eighth note, or whatever, is going to equal one beat. And you don't need to stress too much about that. What you do need to know is that the top number is what tells us how many beats are in measure. So if we're in 4/4 time, how many beats are going to be in that measure? 4. Absolutely right. So in 4/4 time, we have 4 beats in the measure. What if we are in 3/4 time? It's going to be 3 beats per measure. Or in 2/4 time, we have 2 beats per measure. It's the top number that tells us how many beats we're going to have within one measure. So in 4/4 time, that's what I was playing a minute ago, and I was counting to 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your 4/4 time. We've divided the beat up into 4 equal parts within that measure. In 3/4 time, we have 3 beats per measure. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And that gives us kind of a waltz feel. Boom, chink, chink, doom, junk, junk, doo, jet, jet, doo. Okay. And sometimes it's going to move faster or slower. Now things get a little bit more complicated when we talk about 6/8 time because our natural inclination is that there's going to be 6 beats per measure, but we don't actually feel 6/8 time like that. We don't actually feel 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6. We actually feel that as 2 beats per measure divided into threes. 1 2 3 4 5 6 dot 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 2 1 2, but divided into groups of 3. 1 2 3 2 2 3 1 2 3 2 2 3. So 6/8 time gets a little bit complicated, but you don't have to worry about that. Just know that the top number in a time signature generally tells us how many beats are in a measure. Okay? And we talked about this when we talked about dynamics. What is an accent in music? Good. The accent is the emphasis of a note. It's where we emphasize a specific note or beat. So when we accent a certain beat, we're putting a little bit of an emphasis on that note or on that beat. I'm going to grab my guitar again. So if I just play a chord, if I just play a chord rhythm with no accents, well, that's pretty boring. So what I want to do is put some accents in there to give it kind of a groove, right? So that accent is what gives it kind of the groove to it, and it helps us to feel the beat a little bit more, especially if we accent specifically the strong beats. You notice that I accent the first part of every measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. That is the accenting the strong part of the beat. Okay, so what is syncopation then in rhythm? And it has to do with our accents. Good. Syncopation is accenting a note at an unexpected time. So when we accent a weak part of the beat or an off beat, we call that syncopation. So non-syncopated music would sound like this. So everything's just straight ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4. But if I start to put a little bit of rhythm in there, a little bit of a groove, I syncopate it a little bit. So there I'm accenting the strong beat first, but then I'm accenting an upbeat, the and of 2, 1 and 2 and then I'm accenting beat 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now that rhythm is called a tresillo rhythm. You don't have to worry too much about that. But what it is, it's giving us that little bit of syncopation. Okay, it's not accented at a normal time. And rock and pop music does this all of the time. And that's a super common one to hear in rock. Right? And then in dance music, we get an even weirder accent syncopation pretty regularly, where the beat's going 1, 2, 3, 4, but then the rhythm is going, the syncopation is going. Now I'm syncopating 5 notes within a 4-note, a 4-beat measure. So that's going to be a little bit funky, you can tell. All right, so that's where that syncopation comes in there. And it's the syncopation that really drives rhythm and rhythmic music along, especially rock and roll and dance music. Okay, good. So when we talk about meter and we talk about rhythm, we have to talk about tempo a little bit. So what is the tempo in music? What is the tempo telling us? Good. The tempo is the speed of the beat, exactly. So how fast that beat is moving. If it's going slow, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So that's pretty slow. Or if I'm doing it fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So it's the speed of the beat. And we use a metronome to give us our exact tempo. And we measure our tempo using a number. And what is that number actually telling us? Do you know the acronym there that we see most of the time? It's cold in my home office and my guitar keeps going out of tune. Good. Somebody put it in there. The metronome is telling us the BPM, which stands for beats per minute. The beats per minute. Okay. And that's pretty easy to figure out. We just listen to it and we divide it up by how many beats would happen within a minute. And one of the easiest one to figure out is 60 beats per minute. So in 60 beats per minute, you have one beat happening every what? Yeah, one beat happening every second in 60 BPM. Okay, because we divide our minute evenly into 60 seconds. So 60 BPM equals one beat per second. So if you have a clock or a watch with a second hand, you can figure out what 60 beats per minute sounds like. So that would be about 1, 2, 3, 4. So pretty slow tempo for 60 beats per minute. Okay. Another more common tempo is 120 beats per minute, which is going to be twice that. So if we think this is 1 beat per second, then 120 is going to be twice that. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is what we call march tempo. If you listen to any of the John Philip Sousa marches, they're usually going to be around 120. Sometimes he speeds them up a little bit, but for like a quick step march or something. But you know, bum 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 bum. That's about 120 beats per minute. Bum 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 bum. That's kind of your standard march tempo. Good. And we typically, though, when we're looking at music, we're not often going to see an exact BPM marked by the composer because composers don't really care that much. They want it to be relative, just like with dynamics. We don't measure dynamics in exact decibels. We give some Italian terms to indicate an approximation of what we're going to be, of where we want to be, of how loud or soft we want to be. And we do the same thing with tempo. So, what are some Italian terms that we use to mark the tempo at the beginning of the piece? And I believe on page 32 of the book, you have a list of them. Perfect. Presto, largo, adagio. Very good. Grave. Yeah. I know it looks like it should be pronounced grave, but it is Italian. It's grave. Allegro. That's a good one. Andante. Very good. Yeah. So those are some of the common tempo markings that we're going to see, and there are others, of course. There's thousands of them that you're going to see in the music that we listen to in this class. But those are some of the most common ones. We might add like vivace to it, or allegretto, or moderato, or something. You just need to kind of have an idea of basically what they mean. If you look at that list on page 32 of your book, it actually has them listed from slowest to fastest, and that's kind of what I've done here. So our slow tempos are going to be largo, adagio, grave. Those all mean slow. Grave is like super slow. Um, Adagio is kind of an easy pace, an easy, slow pace, and largo is going to be very broad and slow. Andante means a walking pace, so it's going to be kind of a slower, kind of a medium, a moderate pace. Moderato, of course, would be moderately as well. Allegro is a faster pace. That's that march tempo, 120 to 140 or so is going to be allegro. And then presto is going to be a much faster pace. It's where we start to move pretty quick. Okay. Good. So just kind of have an idea. We also have a couple of terms that indicate a direction in time, and those are accelerando and retardando. So accelerando means we're going to gradually get faster. We're going to speed up. If we, put our foot down on the gas, we're going to accelerando. Retardando means that we're going to gradually get slower. Okay. So accelerando is going to gradually get faster. Retardando is going to gradually get slower. Those are all Italian terms that indicate time and speed or tempo. Okay, very good. Okay, let's talk a little bit about notation. Now, this part tends to be a little bit scary for music appreciation students. Now, I'm not going to make you learn how to read music specifically. We're going to kind of cover the basics and I'm going to show you what it looks like so you can kind of get an idea of it, but I'm not going to give you like a quiz or anything on how to read music specifically. But I do want you to have an idea of how music notation works. Okay, so the point of music notation is that it allows composers to communicate their ideas to others. So instead of just, me saying, here's how my song goes, la, 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 and teaching it to you that way, it's going to be a lot more efficient if I can write it down and give it to a large group of people at once. And we started writing down music by about 600 AD or so. We started notating music in different ways. And early music notation looked a little bit weird. We'll talk about that next week. But by the time we get to 1200 AD, we have a pretty good idea of what our music is going to look like. We're more in what we call standard notation of today. And by that point, we had decided that we were going to use specific letters of the alphabet to indicate specific notes. We don't use the entire alphabet. What letters do we use in musical notation? Perfect. Somebody anticipated that coming and was ready to type that in. Good. We use the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, the first 7 letters of the alphabet, and I think that's an exam question, is we use the first 7 letters of the alphabet to indicate musical notation. Now, what's weird about this is that if we play those notes in order, and then I go ahead and add another A, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, that actually sounds like a minor scale. Okay, which is a little bit weird to us. We would expect it to be a major scale if we do just the letters with no flats or sharps starting at A. But that's because when the musical notes first came around, minor was actually more common than major. Okay, and today actually in pop music, minor is becoming more common than major. But I digress. Okay, so just know that once we get to A, we start over. So when you have one letter name to another letter name, that's how you know we've reached the octave. So A to A to A, right? And we talked about those frequencies the other day, right? If this is 440, then this one's 220, and that one's 110. So those are all the note A, okay? Our treble clef, when we write musical notation, is typically used for the higher range. Good. And the treble clef is the one down here on the left. Now, we also sometimes call the treble clef the G clef. And that's because the treble clef tells us what line is the note G? So in the treble clef, the second line from the bottom is the note G, and we're told that by this little curly Q right here. It cues around the G, the note G, to indicate where that is. And actually, the original treble clef, and we'll see how well I can draw this with my mouse, looked like that. It looked like a cursive G with the note G going right in the middle of that little Q. And then it was eventually stylized into what we now see as the standard treble clef. Okay, good. So if treble clef is used for higher range, what's the bass clef used for? Good, the lower range. And the bass clef has another name as well, because the bass clef indicates where the note F is for us. So we sometimes call the bass clef the F clef. And that's telling us where the note F is by these two dots. Okay, the two dots surround the F. And again, the original F clef would have looked something like that. Okay, and eventually was stylized into what we see now. Now there are other clefs that we don't need to worry about, the alto clef, the tenor clef, stuff like that. We're not going to worry about those. You just need to worry about the treble clef and the bass clef. And we put those together, we get what is called the grand staff. And this is what a pianist sees whenever they read music. Okay, the grand staff has a treble clef on top of a bass clef, and for pianists, that we see that the left hand is going to play the bottom staff, and the right hand is going to play the top staff. And sometimes they'll actually both be bass clef if they're both playing in the low range, but most of the time it's going to be treble on top, bass on bottom, generally. And that's because when you sit down at a piano, your left hand, the left side of the piano, is generally the lower notes, and the right side of the piano is the higher notes, just based on the design of the piano. Okay, so this little chart shows you all of the common letter names, and notice that right in the middle of the staff is the note C, and we call that note middle C. Okay, so if we go one ledger line below the treble clef and one ledger line above the bass clef, we get the note C. It lands right in the middle. And a ledger line, I kind of blew past that, is if we have a note that actually goes above the staff, we just add extra lines above or below to indicate those notes. And we would just keep counting down to figure out what those notes are. Okay, so if we count up from C, as we go up the staff, we go up the alphabet. So the next line there is going to be D, the next space is E, the next line is F. Sitting on top of the staff would be G, and then the first ledger line there would be A. And then if it were sitting on top of the ledger line, it would be B, and then the next ledger line would be C. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Don't stress too much about it if it doesn't. Now, we need to talk about how we notate rhythm, and I'm going to just kind of go over to this chart. So when we notate rhythm, we're going to use these symbols. Now, we don't have to worry about, I wasn't paying that much attention when I pulled this up, this chart in here. These names are the English versions of the names. Don't worry about that because the English are weird. We are going to use the kind of what we call, oh my goodness, my phone's ringing. Decline. Sorry. I'm on my Mac, so whenever my phone rings, it comes through to my Mac. Okay. We are going to use the English terms here. And our basic unit of measuring rhythms is the whole note, which looks like this. It looks like a football. And typically in 4/4 time, we have one whole note per bar. And that's indicated by a rest if we're doing 4 beats of silence. Okay? And everything else divides from there. No matter what time signature we're in, it all divides from there. So the next one down is going to be called what? We take the whole and we're going to split it in two, so we're going to divide it in half. Exactly. So we're going to call that a half note. So we still have the open note head, but we add an extra line to it, which we call a stem. Okay, and that's a half note. And the half note handily looks like a hat when we see it indicated as a rest. Now, what happens if we cut half in half? We end up with 4 what? Perfect. You guys are a lot faster than my 10 o'clock class this morning. It was like, what's half of half? 4s. So half of half is a quarter. So we call this a quarter note. And here it looks a lot like a half note, but we fill in the note head. And there's going to be 4 of these within a measure of 4/4 time. And this is what the quarter note rest looks like. Just kind of a little squiggly line. Okay. What do we get if we cut a quarter in half? 1/8. Good. I always question myself when I type the word 1/8 because it just looks like there's too many H's. But that's right. Okay, we get 1/8 notes. And when you see an 1/8 note by itself, it's going to have a little flag hanging off the end of it. But whenever we combine them together, we use this bar across them that we call a beam. Okay, we beam them together. And there's going to be 8 of them per bar, 8 1/8 notes per bar. That makes sense. If we cut an 1/8 in half, we get what? Good. A 16th. And with a 16th note, I'm going to kind of put that above so you can see it. We just add a second flag to it or a second beam to it if we have them beamed together. And with the rest, we just put an extra little squiggly. And it just keeps going from there. A 32nd note has 3 flags. A 64th note has 4. A 128th note has 5. And that's about as high as we're going to normally go. Anything beyond that, and the composer's just being ridiculous for no reason. Okay. Now, I believe one of the questions on the exam asks you what happens if we put a dot on a note. Now, you probably, if you were in band or choir in high school, you probably learned that a dotted half note equals 3 beats. Sorry. The problem that I have with that is that it's not actually telling you what the dot does. You can add a dot to any kind of note. And what does that dot actually do? Does anybody know that? It's kind of weird to explain it. Perfect, Samira. Good. That's a good definition of it. So a dot on a note takes half of that note's value and adds it back onto it. So we take a half note, and then what's half of a half note? If we look at our chart here, half of a half note is a quarter note. So it takes the half note and it adds a quarter note to it. So that's all a dotted half note is. Now in 4/4 time, it does get 3 beats. Okay. So we can also do the same thing to a quarter note. If we take a quarter note and add a dot to it, then we're going to add up a quarter note plus what? What's half of a quarter note? An 1/8 note. Good. So in 4/4 time, it's going to be a beat and a half. Don't stress too much about rhythm. You need to know what a dot does. That's part of the definition. And you kind of need to be familiar with how this division happens, but that's about it. Okay. Any questions about notating rhythm? Y'all, my dog is in here snoring and it's cracking me up. He heard me talking about him and looked. Okay. I think that's where I want to get to today. We'll talk about melody and harmony together because they are related, and then we'll finish up part one on Friday. I don't want to rush through talking about melody here at the very end of class. Okay? Any questions about anything in part one that we've talked about so far? I know some of this basic music theory stuff can be a little bit confusing, but don't stress about it too bad. You just kind of need to be familiar with these terms so that if you see them later on describing the music, you know what we're talking about. Okay? All right. If there's no further questions for the good of the group, I will see you guys on Friday. Remember that you've got assignments due on Friday at midnight. Don't wait until the last minute to do those because they will take you a while to do all of them. That's why I split them up over 2 weeks. Also, check your grades. I have been grading stuff. Make sure that you're getting credit for all the stuff that you're turning in. If something hasn't shown up yet that you've done, make sure to email me and I'll get it cleared up, figure out what's going on. Otherwise, I will see you on Friday. Have a great day. I'll stick around for a minute if anybody has any questions.